Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? I thought we would just have another one of these chats. What's new? How are folks doing? I'm sitting here. Unfortunately, we don't have the bookshelf today, but we are sitting here, and I thought we would just have one of our afternoon conversations. Like I said, I'm trying to do a lot more of these than I used to. So while we're here, glad you all are with us. Glad we can have a conversation today. Got plenty of unnamed orange beverage. And yeah, just trying to keep doing these a lot more than I used to. It's a good way to spend time as I'm still working from home. Right? There will probably come a time where I have to slow down in doing the lives, but that time has not yet arrived yet. And folks, we're doing great things here. We're having great conversations. The Kamala Harris book is now available. People can order copies of it. I'm going to be doing some interviews on some podcasts about it. That'll be fun. And I figured it was just kind of a way to pass the time here in the afternoon. I would read to you from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. I'm not going to read to you from the opening essay. Now, the opening essay of City Builders and Vandals is probably the most important part. I instead have decided I'm going to read to you an essay in the book. It's called Trump versus Bezos, Three Major Divisions in the Ruling Class. And I am going to read you this essay because I think it's particularly relevant as we face the upcoming election. With the elections coming up in November, a lot of fear about what might happen, what might be the results. I think that this particular essay is timely. And as the super chats come in, I will answer them. So, folks, if you haven't done so already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Tweet this out, make this a bigger conversation, post this on your Reddit, post this on your Facebook. Can you talk about the specifics of Iran's state-run economy, why the U.S. calls it a klepto-Marxist state? Okay, in fact, right, all right. Iran's economy. All right, that is written down. All right, Iran's economy, klepto-Marxist, theocrat, fascist. That's a very important point about the Assange trial coming up, or not coming up, happening, and the media is just ignoring it. All right, folks, I'm reading to you from City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. This is an essay in the book called Trump versus Bezos, Three Major Divisions in the Ruling Class. Jeff Bezos, considered to be the richest man on earth in terms of measurable wealth, and Donald Trump, arguably the most powerful man on earth in terms as president of the United States, are figuratively at each other's throats. The U.S. media is abuzz with talk of genital photographs, blackmail allegations, sexual misconduct, media bias. However, those who look deeper may see bigger differences and hidden rivalries at stake. Two hostile camps have emerged within the circles of American power. Notions that wars, political unrest, and clashes within society are the results of disagreements among a shadowy elite is a theme that repeatedly surfaces in art, culture, and fringe political discourse in Western countries. Aleister Crowley, the early 20th century occultist, was known for putting forward the concept of a hidden church that ruled the world. He presented his followers with the belief that shadowy societies and secret orders among the elite were behind the scenes, manipulating world events in order to serve their own ends. One of Crowley's novels, Moonchild, published in 1929, presented the First World War as a result from clashes among different factions of secret witches and wizards who controlled various governments. Crowley's occultist ramblings, most not presented as fiction, are easy to laugh at. To modern readers, they almost sound like a bizarre meeting between Alex Jones' broadcasts and J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels. However, Crowley's worldview is pretty well echoed today in the various conspiracy theories that fill the internet. In the early years of the 20th century, many anti-communist Roman Catholics began asserting that the Bavarian Illuminati, which was discovered and suppressed by the church in the late 1700s, was still active. History remembers Xi Jinping. All right, writing it down. Okay. Adherents of this theory argue that the wealthiest and most powerful people were all part of an anti-Christian secret society, and as part of it were manipulating world events and fomenting chaos. The former British athlete and sports commentator David Icke gained a significant following preaching that a secret race of reptilians controlled the world. The anti-Semitic conspiracy text, The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, is still widely circulated in many parts of the world. The notion that some shadowy group of hidden rulers is manipulating world events, and that the conflicts and clashes in politics and geopolitics represent something deeper and more cryptic, is certainly a prevalent belief within many different narratives written to explain it. In addition to all the various conspiracy narratives, there are some who have attempted to utilize political economy and historical materialism rather than mystical legends to develop a similar narrative. Karl Marx's pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, describes a fight among the rich and powerful in France in the midst of an economic crisis. Marx described Louis Napoleon's Party of Order that seized power in 1851 as representing the finance capitalists and the farmers of France, and suppressing the industrial capitalists while enacting swift economic reforms in the hopes of restoring order and holding off revolution. In 1935, Georgy Dimitrov oriented the Communist International to make strategic alliances with democratic capitalists against a global fascist conspiracy, which he described as, quote, the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist elements of finance capital. The Popular Front strategy of the communist movement was based on a division among the capitalists of the world between the democratic bourgeoisie and the fascist bourgeoisie. Carl Oglesby, the 1960s radical, penned a similar narrative during the 1970s, hoping to explain the divisions among the American elite. His text, widely circulated in leftist and progressive circles, was called The Yankee and Cowboy War, and attempted to explain the Vietnam War, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the Watergate scandal in the context of clashing economic interests. When one examines Jeff Bezos and Donald Trump's disagreements, and the forces that line up behind one or other of the powerful men, one can see three primary divides among the circles of wealth and power in the United States. The first is a divide between allies of Saudi Arabia and allies of the Muslim Brotherhood. Jeff Bezos has spoken up and said that Saudi Arabia is possibly involved in efforts to embarrass him. He points out that the Washington Post, which he owns, has been harshly critical of Saudi Arabia for killing Jamal Khashoggi. He also emphasized the ties of Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia to the National Enquirer. It is true that in recent years, the Washington Post, long an outpost of apologism for U.S.-backed autocracies, suddenly became more critical of the Saudi monarchy. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, who bashed Saudi Arabia on the campaign trail, has become a sharp defender of the Saudi monarchy. And while Trump has doubled down on supporting the Saudi kingdom, U.S. relations with Erdogan's government in Turkey have also declined. Meanwhile, Trump has echoed Saudi Arabia's allegations against the monarchy of Qatar. It's no secret to anyone that Saudi Arabia is the fountainhead of Wahhabism, an interpretation of the Islamic faith that mandates an autocratic government and a strict interpretation of the Quran. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia intentionally funds and promotes religious figures and institutions described as Wahhabis or Salafis, or sometimes called Deobandis in India and Pakistan, that promote this version of Islam. The Wahhabi networks of the Saudis have long been a source of revenue for Pentagon military contractors and a vehicle for waging proxy wars. Zbigniew Brzezinski arranged for the USA to support a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden, who was the wealthy heir of a construction firm. Bin Laden purchased huge amounts of weapons from the United States, and with CIA assistance, Pompeo is essentially an Israeli agent in my mind. Look at thoughts on Israel. Okay, Pompeo. Okay, writing it down. Bin Laden purchased huge amounts of weapons from the United States and with CIA assistance built a Wahhabi army in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union and topple the People's Democratic Republic. More recently, in Syria and Libya, the Saudis have purchased US-made weapons and mobilized their Wahhabi networks to work against independent socialist governments. In both Syria and Libya, Wahhabi factions control a large amount of territory. It should be noted that the ISIL terrorists emerged from the larger Saudi-backed Wahhabi milieu. Another Islamic faction that has worked with U.S. intelligence in the Middle East is clearly at odds with Saudi Arabia. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt in 1928 as a group of small business owners who saw Western ideas, Marxism, and nationalism as the greatest dangers to the religious traditions of the Arab world. When Gamal Abdel Nasser took power and began moving Egypt toward Arab socialism, the U.S. government began covertly funding and supporting the Muslim Brotherhood to work against him. With funding and assistance of U.S. intelligence, the Muslim Brotherhood spread across the Middle East. It fed rural and poor Arabs and used them as foot soldiers against Baathism and Marxism. The Muslim Brotherhood is illegal in Saudi Arabia and is considered to be a terrorist organization. The Muslim Brotherhood opposes Wahhabism and rejects the notion of an absolute monarchy, favoring free markets and elected governments. The monarchy of Qatar is the primary funder of the Muslim Brotherhood, and its media, Al Jazeera, promotes an editorial perspective that is in line with the Qatari monarchy and the Muslim Brotherhood. Erdogan, the Turkish president, is seen as a close ally of the Muslim Brotherhood, and his government also echoes a similar worldview. During Obama's presidency, Qatari media, Saudi-funded Wahhabi preachers, the Muslim Brotherhood, and U.S. foreign policy all marched in lockstep. They targeted Syria and Libya, and despite their disagreements with each other. But now it seems that the Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood are clashing. Jeff Bezos, the Washington Post, and the Democratic Party seem to be sympathetic to Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, while Trump seems to be favoring the Saudi monarchy and Wahhabism. Why do some factions of the U.S. business elite favor the Saudis, while others favor the Brotherhood? This can be explained in the context of an ongoing feud between the intelligence agencies and the U.S. military. The U.S. military apparatus and the hundreds of billions of dollars spent on it are a huge subsidy to the economy. Arms exports by weapons manufacturers are also a huge moneymaker. The term military Keynesianism, which has been used to describe the astronomical military spending, which functions as a government stimulus, which the U.S. economy could not do without. The many corporations involved in weapons manufacturing and export see a global arms race, the escalation of conflicts around the world, and the image of the USA as a mighty, warlike power armed to the teeth as in their financial interest. Trump has been very friendly to such forces, describing himself as eager to sell weapons, using the slogan "Peace through Strength" on the campaign trail. However, the intel agencies of the United States tend to favor a different foreign policy strategy. Intel agencies, staffed with graduates of Harvard and Yale, have carefully studied the art of soft power. They seek to present the United States as a friendly world power that rarely meddles in other nations' affairs. The CIA also works to present the United States as overcoming racism, embracing Islam and other cultures, and becoming a more benevolent country, disproving the propaganda of detractors. The intel agencies have mastered the art of manipulating global conflicts from behind the scenes, utilizing proxy forces, and crafting public opinion to fit U.S. foreign policy narratives. But now, as Trump insults the Muslims of the world, openly dismisses concerns about Saudi atrocities, the Muslim Brotherhood sees itself increasingly at odds with the White House. Not surprisingly, Qatar and Turkey are clashing with Saudi Arabia. Trump speaks of the importance of weapons sales from Saudi Arabia, pandering to the Pentagon and its suppliers. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos' ties to U.S. intelligence are no secret at all. Amazon has designed software and cloud services for intelligence agencies. But beyond Bezos' direct connections, the various Silicon Valley monopolies owe their very existence to funding from the American intelligence agencies. It was a strategic move to counter the Soviet Union during the late Cold War that paid off for the United States. The weapons manufacturers, who make loads and loads of money selling military hardware to Saudi Arabia, favor a very different strategy around the world than the Central Intelligence Agency, that has spent years cultivating the Muslim Brotherhood as a useful proxy force. The two sections of the American state apparatus seem to be tied to opposite sides of the Trump-Bezos disagreement. However, there is another long-standing clash among the elite that is also at play. This is a fight between the rich and the ultra-rich. Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world, according to some calculations. Bezos fits in with a crowd of people in the United States that could accurately be called the ultra-rich. Family names like Morgan, Carnegie, DuPont, Mellon, Rothschild, and Rockefeller make up a special class of untouchable, entrenched power that goes back for generations. The United States has over 1 million millionaires and many billionaires, but most of them are not in this select group. The Rockefeller family of Standard Oil, Chase Bank, and the Council on Foreign Relations, and a score of powerful think tanks and lobbies have far more influence than a typical millionaire or billionaire could ever dream of. The Rockefeller family were the primary financial backers of Planned Parenthood, abortion, birth control, experimental art, and the legalization of pornography. The Rockefellers funded and promoted the work of Alfred Kinsey, during the 1950s, and widely circulated social research that showed that a more tolerant attitude toward homosexuality and the sexual revolution of the 1960s should be permitted. The Rockefellers are tied closely with U.S. intelligence agencies. The Council on Foreign Relations is primarily funded by ExxonMobil, the direct descendant of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Art projects sponsored by the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program during the 1950s and 60s often received grants and promotions from Rockefeller foundations. Representing this stratum of ruling families, Warren Buffett famously said, "Tax me more," after the financial crisis, arguing that Keynesian welfare state solutions should be explored. Why do the richest of the rich favor a more left-wing economic policy? Because they can afford it. Higher taxes will barely dent their astronomical piles of wealth, and they can easily skate the tax collectors with their elaborate networks of foundations and trusts to conceal their vast and often incalculable wealth. It should be no surprise that Foreign Affairs, the publication of the Rockefellers, touted, quote, the social democratic future of the USA in 2014. However, among the wider circles of wealth and power in the United States, there is huge resentment against the ultra-rich. The fracking cowboys of oil and gas resent the near monopoly status of the big four super major oil companies tied to Wall Street banks. The owners of retail giants resent Jeff Bezos, pushing them off the market with online shopping. Trump has openly complained about alleged special treatment for Amazon from the U.S. Postal Service. These lower levels of the rich, these cockroach capitalists, favor a more libertarian economic approach. They tend to truly believe the economic theories that say capitalism can create a market utopia, and they tend to be less convinced of the need for social welfare programs and regulations in order to hold off the threat of unrest. Betsy DeVos, the education secretary of the Trump administration, is a wealthy woman. But what is the source of her wealth? She is the heir to the fortune created by Amway, the multi-level marketing corporation widely decried as a pyramid scheme. The fact that a fundamentalist Christian associated with selling Tupperware is allowed to run the U.S. Department of Education, not some carefully trained and cultivated Harvard graduate with the blessing of the Rockefellers and DuPonts, has got to be a point of contention between Trump's coalition of new money and the old establishment of ultra-rich families. In 2004, liberal radio commentator Garrison Keillor accurately articulated the sentiments among the ultra-rich, describing the Republican Party as, quote, a party of hairy-backed swamp developers and corporate shills, faith-based economists, fundamentalist bullies with Bibles, Christians of convenience, freelance racists, misanthropic frat boys, shrieking midgets on AM radio, tax cheats, nihilists in golf pants, brown shirts in pinstripes, sweatshop tycoons, hacks, fakers, aggressive dorks, and Lamborghini libertarians. Trump represents the fracking companies, the hotel and restaurant chains, Sheldon Adelson's Nevada-based empire, sports team owners, and other wealthy people who have been locked out of the club that traditionally runs the U.S. government. The fact that Trump enacted such dramatic reforms to the federal prison system should not be shocking either, as it seems that so many of the wealthy people who have gone to federal prison for financial crimes are among his backers. Trump stands with the Wall Street execs who cannot buy their way out when they are charged for insider trading or tax fraud. Donald Trump is himself a real estate mogul. He was able to rise to prestige among the wealthy by manipulating the media and fighting dirty in struggles for valuable New York City property. His presidency, almost universally opposed in the mainstream media during the campaign, represents an upsurge among the rich against the ultra-rich like Jeff Bezos. Ronald Reagan was known for constantly reminding other American politicians, quote, "We are all friends after 6 o'clock." And in his time, this was mostly true. Disagreements on policy and strategy were secondary. The enemy was Soviet communism. The goal was U.S. hegemony, and the sources of financial backing from major political figures were often identical. The stakes in American politics were not very high, and the significant political debates were often overcompensating in complexity for what they were lacking in substance. However, in recent years, it seems pretty clear that America's political elites are not friends after six anymore. Astute scholars of American history will recall incidents like the caning of Charles Sumner, when Southern racist Congressman Preston Brooks violently attacked his anti-slavery colleague on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives in 1856. Disagreements among the ruling elite and Bonapartist maneuvers by different factions to suppress the other seem to be a defining aspect of America in 2019. And that was my essay. You can find it in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. And I hope that that explains this division in the ruling class, because there is a big fight in the ruling class right now, a very, very big fight among the capitalists. The capitalists are fighting among each other, and this election and its aftermath, I suspect, is going to be quite intense. So we've all got our eyes on that. On that note, folks, I'm going to take another drink of unnamed orange beverage. And I think before we get to the super chats, I guess it's a little early. I mean, we're only about a half hour into it, but why not? Let's do our roll call. Names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you. Zanctus is from Puerto Rico. Hello, Zanctus. Welcome, welcome. Names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you. Ozwhistle's in Australia. Adam M. in Las Vegas. Springfield, Missouri, Zach. Ben in Toronto. Tim in Kentucky. Hello from Portland, Oregon. Hills from the Bronx. Dust James is in Virginia. Iran. Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Islamic Revolution, Rob in Australia. Helen Woolley in Melbourne. Los Angeles. Connecticut. Madrid, Spain. Michael Moran in Edinburgh, Scotland. Harry is in Madrid, Spain. All right. Who else is with us today? Heathrow, Spencer Richards. Elliot in Austin, Texas. Maupin, Ireland. Long Island, New York. Will Lotz, Kentucky. Ron in St. George, Utah. Shaniqua from Buffalo. Motion from Iran. Mo in Pomona, California. Unknown. Las Vegas at work right now. Hi from Austin, Texas, says George Kraft. Lyle from cyberspace. Joanne from the Netherlands. Ireland. Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Edinburgh, Alberta, Canada. Edmonton, I should say. Alberta, Canada. Who else is with us today? Right? OP from Treasure Coast, Florida. Hello from London, where I just inherited a place. Naples, Florida, says Harold Sullivan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Who else is with us? Stalingrad, USSR, says Will Lotz. Will Lotz is from Stalingrad. Pacific Northwest, says John Rain. John Rain. All right. Someone else. Who else is with us today? DC metropolitan area. All right. That's Chris Kazam. All right. Who else is with us today? Who is joining us this afternoon? Lagos, Nigeria. Dan from Pennsylvania, PG County, says Big G Haywood. Who else is with us? Anyone else? Want me to give them a shout out as we do our little roll call? Eli from California, says Mushroom Man. Who else is with us today? Hosino, originally from Maryland. Nate from Sydney. Caleb rarely misses a thorough roll call. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Skylar from Utah. Right? Who else is with us? Who else is with us today? Anyone else want a shout out? Elise from Alexandria. Welcome, Elise. Is this your fourth live in a row? Yep. Like I said, Kingdom of Tonga, Albany. Joe Gale from Nassau County, Long Island, New York. Dan Brito from Albany. David Faust from Phoenix. Welcome, David. Vegas. Hosino from Vegas. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Anyone else? Chi-Town Lana, Free Assange. Who else is with us today? Anyone else? Anyone else joining us this afternoon for our lovely, lovely afternoon chat? Trevor from Ireland. Welcome, welcome. Love many streams there have been this week, says Will Lotz. Hey, I'm trying to do more of them. That's my goal. I want to exercise almost every day, and I want to do a stream almost every day. I want to stay on top of this. It's a better use of my energy, right? I have so much downtime. I guess I'm finally adjusting to life post-COVID, right? I'm finally adjusting to not going to my office, but working remotely. I'm adjusting to life at home. We got Nick Name in Phoenix, Arizona. And that means that I'm going to be on here more often, right? Because this is something I can do. It's a good use of my time. I can engage with all of you. I can enlighten you. Even if I don't have a big spiel to give, I can just read you an essay from one of my books or an article or something like that. All right. All right. So we've got 3 super chats already. If you got more, just send them my way. And I will answer them one at a time. So someone asked about Iran's economy. Why does the USA call it a klepto-Marxist state? And why do leftists call it a theocratic fascist state? Well, I've been to Iran. I've spent quite a bit of time in Iran. All right, so folks, before the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Iran was a US-backed monarchy. It was the monarchy dictatorship, right? The Shah, the Pahlavi family, they ruled. So, thank you for your pre-birthday live, says Shaniqua McAdams. Well, I'm always glad to do this. Always glad to be here. Iran's economy was largely, it was largely capitalist, but there was, it was a monarchy, right? And they had a government-run airline, and oil was nationalized in name, but it was basically the property of Standard Oil and the Rockefellers and BP. BP was in there, and so was Standard Oil. And happy birthday to you coming up, Shaniqua, right? And so the revolution happened. One of the main grievances of the revolution was that so much of the public was allowed to be poor at the time that the country had so much oil. And during the revolution, there were many different factions, but ultimately Khomeini had a big network of religious people throughout the country. He'd been one of the most popular clerics. People in the Iranian military would listen to tapes of Khomeini from exile would be listened to all over the country. Underground radio broadcasts. Khomeini had a huge network of followers. He was a very, very well-known religious cleric. So he returned to the country, and he immediately formed what were called Basij. And Basij means mobilized oppressed. And these are like Soviets. They're like, revolutionary committees. You go to Cuba, in every neighborhood you have the CDR, communist songs. All right, I'll write that down. Communist songs. Sing. All right. You have the Committee to Defend the Revolution in Venezuela and, in Nicaragua and places like that. You have Bolivarian circles. In the Soviet Union, they used to have Soviets. In China, they had peasant associations, factory associations. In every neighborhood in Iran, you have what's called the Basij Council. That means the Council of the Mobilized Oppressed. And it is the organization that basically carries out the will of the revolution on a local level. On top of that, in Iran, you have something called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And this was formed, and this is a military organization that is above the elected government. Right? So in Iran, you have the elected government, you have the actual Iranian military that is directed by the elected government. But then you have the supreme leader, which is the revolutionary leader, the religious leader. Originally it was Khomeini, now it's Khamenei. And then you have this military organization called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Now, the biggest economic entity in Iran is the IRGC. Right? There is no other entity that is as big as the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, right? And this is a military organization that is directly accountable only to the supreme leader. The elected government has no authority over it. And it owns a lot of oil, and it owns a lot of factories, and it owns a lot of bridges, and it owns a lot of highways, and it owns a lot of parks, and it's not a capitalist institution. It is very much an institution that is under the control of the state and serves the goals of the revolution, and it is actually the largest economic entity in the country. In addition to that, Iran has a number of industries that are state-run, like steel manufacturing in Iran is state-run. Car manufacturing in Iran technically is private, but the car manufacturers in Iran don't turn a profit. When I was in Iran, it was interesting because the price of cars in Iran was starting to go down. In Iran, the only foreign car you can get in Iran, for example, is a BMW, right? And a BMW's price, because of the sanctions, is inflated by 800%. So most Iranians drive an Iranian-made car, and there are a couple Iranian car manufacturers, but they're not really private. They get a government subsidy. They don't really turn a profit, number one. Number two, the people who run it are members of the Revolutionary Guard. In order to work there, you kind of have to be a member of the Revolutionary Guard. So it's kind of like Huawei, where it's private, but not really. And a lot of things in Iran are like that. They are private, but not really. They're run by the government. And major industries, power plants. There's a health service. There's a national health care system that is guaranteed to all citizens. They have private hospitals also. There is, an education system, right? University education is free for anyone in Iran. And actually, there's more women in the Iranian university system than men right now. Education is guaranteed by the state. Anyone who is unemployed in Iran can go to a government office and they give you a job. Basically, you show up, there's an office, you show up there, you're unemployed, well, we give you a job. So you don't have unemployment in the same way you have it over here. You have unemployment in the sense that there are not, like, good-paying career jobs, but there is no unemployment in the sense of no one's not getting paid, right? There is a government office you go to. If you are unemployed, you work. And they have things like 5-year plans. During the Iraq-Iran War, Khomeini launched what was called the construction jihad. And it was like the 5-year plans. And he mobilized the Basij Councils to build very rapidly power plants throughout the country, very rapidly build telecommunications so that everyone had access to a phone, very rapidly pave roads, and it was like the 5-year plans. The whole country was mobilized to serve the goals of the revolution. And what's also very interesting is that, major industries are nationalized. Oil is nationalized. The state's revenue mainly comes from oil exports. The military is a big part of the economy. The Revolutionary Guards are the biggest entity in the country. You have these local Basij councils that enforce the goals of the revolution. But probably the biggest moment for me to realize how not capitalist Iran is, right? One of the slogans of the Islamic Revolution is not capitalism, but Islam, right? War of poverty against wealth, not capitalism, but Islam, neither east nor west. Those are the slogans of the revolution. But I actually will share this anecdote because this is proof of how not capitalist Iran is. So I remember I was in Iran, and I remember, I was going to go on this ship, and I did go on this ship, this humanitarian mission with the Red Crescent Society to deliver humanitarian aid to Yemen. So I was we were in the south of Iran, in a city called Bandar Abbas, which is like a port city. And one thing that blew my mind was how many Chinese ships there were. I mean, it was Chinese ships, Chinese stores, Chinese companies. China and Iran trade quite a bit, but that's a whole other story. But I was in Bandar Abbas, and we were staying at this very nice hotel in Bandar Abbas, waiting for the ship to be ready so we could go and deliver medical aid to Yemen. So I remember as we were getting ready to leave and get on the ship, all the Iranian TV networks came to the hotel where we were staying to interview us. So we're in the lobby of the hotel. All the TV networks from Iran are interviewing me, the American, the German guy, the French guy, about why we're going to go on this humanitarian mission to bring medical aid to Yemen. So we're going to be interviewed, and the hotel manager, I think he was the hotel owner, came out and said, "Not in my hotel lobby. You cannot film in my hotel lobby. You're not doing this interview." And the various TV networks, you know, they said, "Are you sure we can't do this? I mean, this is an official, mission. I mean, this is the Red Crescent Society. No, 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 not in my hotel. Not in my hotel. This interview can't happen." So they took the cameras down. We couldn't do our interviews. So then somebody took out their cell phones and made a phone call. And pretty soon, some guys in suits showed up. And they said to the hotel manager, "We'd like to see you in the back, please." A few minutes later, the hotel manager came out and apologized to all of us personally, took us all aside. "I'm so sorry, sir, for not letting you do your interview in the lobby. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry, sir." And immediately, we were allowed to do the interview. As we're doing the interviews with the Iranian TV networks, more guys in suits start showing up. And they start searching every room in the hotel. That was the moment where I realized that there is no private property in Iran, right? That hotel was private. It was owned, I assume, by that guy. I assume he was the owner, not the manager. He did not have the right to tell us we couldn't film in that hotel, right? The state has the power, and that's basically what was told to me. In Iran, yes, there's a big private sector. There's a lot of stores. I mean, I went to the northern part of Tehran. There's a lot of hamburger restaurants where they have hamburgers. It's like almost like people pretending to be Americans or something. But at the end of the day, much like in China, when the government shows up, you do what the government says. You don't have the right to say, "This is my private property, get out, government." No, I mean, there is a private sector, but at the end of the day, major industries are run by the state. These local councils, the Basij, are the basis of the state's power. Military coup in the United States. Point of no return. And it's not capitalism, right? I mean, there are billboards everywhere that are condemning the crimes of U.S. imperialism, condemning the crimes of Israel. There is a huge state that's revenue comes from oil. There's a huge Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There's a huge Basij. It's not capitalism, right? Capitalism is profits in command. Profits are not in command of Iran. There is a market sector, but there's this huge force called the Basij. There's this huge force called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There's this huge force called the government. There's this huge mobilized population, the Basij, the councils of the oppressed, and the state is controlled by a heavily mobilized population. The Islamic Republic draws its strength from the population, right? The population backs it. And actually, what's kind of amazing is that in a lot of cases, the poor people see the government as protecting them from the rich. There is a lot of wealthy people in Iran. Their wealth came from the revolution. It's because of the revolution and the state, central planning and stuff that Iran has been able to develop. I mean, there's huge highways, they've universal electricity, universal education, all kinds of stuff. But that came from the revolution, right? But because of the gains of Iran's revolution, there's been a growth of the capitalist class, much like China, right? Because of this state-run economy, you have the growth of a capitalist class. That it creates the level of the basis that you can then have a capitalist class. But what I saw when I was in Iran was that capitalist class lives in absolute terror of the government and of the Basij and of the Revolutionary Guard, and the capitalist class is not in power. The capitalist class is afraid of the government. And I also remember when they took me to see Khamenei, right? I do remember, after I went on the ship, after I got back to Iran, I had the real honor and privilege of being one of the few Americans to be in the presence of the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei. They took me to the mausoleum where Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, is buried. And it was the anniversary of his death, and there were about 20,000 people gathered for a ceremony in which the supreme leader of Iran spoke. And I was about 100 feet away from him. And I was in the audience, and that was a life-changing experience, to be in an audience of 20,000 people who are screaming in adoration of the supreme leader. and that I was not seeing, the richest of the rich. I mean, that audience was very, very working class. I mean, these were people from the countryside. These were people in the military. These were low income people. And to see them all gathered to see to see the supreme leader, and the way that they praised the supreme leader. It was amazing. It was an experience that it changed me. I mean, I do remember when I went in. Right, I was the only American there, and I do remember they saw that I had a U.S. passport, and it was like they were like teenagers, right? The Revolutionary Guards or whoever they were that were searching you on the way in. They gave me the pat down of my life, right? I have never been so thoroughly searched as I was searched by those teenagers. They took my wallet out of my pocket, and they took my credit cards out and were like cutting their hands to see if it was sharp enough, right? Like they took every credit card, every membership card. They felt me up. There was no way I could have gotten anything into that mausoleum. I mean, I have never been so thoroughly searched as I was searched, right? They saw I was an American. You're going to come in and see the supreme leader. Okay, you're going to be thoroughly searched. So I got in, right? And they put me in the foreign section. And it was mainly Chinese people that I was with. A lot of Chinese diplomats, some African diplomats, some Russians. And it was this section where it was like foreign friends of the Iranians got to sit. And so that's where I was. And we're all wearing suits. And we're just kind of casual, right? Because we're foreign friends, right? And when the supreme leader of Iran walked in, it was like the energy in the room was like, ugh. I mean, it was like, we're all waiting. There are different speakers. I think Khomeini's grandson spoke and other. But then when the supreme leader of Iran walked up to the balcony, I mean, this room exploded. I mean, like nothing you've ever seen. It was like the room just exploded, okay? And all the men, people started crying because he entered the room. Men were like moving back and forth and crying because he was just in the room. Michael Harris, 2005, pandemics due to livestock. And it was something else, It was something else. And to just be in that room with thousands of people, 20,000 people. And so I had a translating thing. I got to hear the speech over a translator and listen to his speech where he talked about, the Islamic Revolution and their beliefs. And at one point, he talked about how there was a controversy in Iran because some people claimed that Khomeini, who was the founder of the Islamic Revolution, had never called the United States the Great Satan. And Khamenei, the supreme leader, made clear that the United States was considered to be the Great Satan. That was true. And he said, we don't mean the U.S. people. We are talking about the U.S. system. The system of imperialism and capitalism is what we view as the Great Satan. It's centered around America. And we definitely believe the USA is what he calls Shaitani Bazorg, right, which is the Great Satan. That's how they say it in Iran, Shaitani Bazorg. And so after he makes this point that absolutely we do consider the United States to be the Great Satan, 20,000 people, right, not a small crowd of people, but 20,000 people in this auditorium. Keep in mind, I'm the only American in the room. 20,000 people all began chanting, "Death to America." Death to America. And that was an emotional experience for me, to stand there in the room with 20,000 people. And I believe they were like pumping their fists, kind of. They were doing this, "Death to America, death to America." And I just sobbed. I just broke down and cried. I was just sobbing. It was an experience that changed my life. I just stood there, and 20,000 people were chanting "Death to America," and I just started crying. That's all I could do. I just started crying. It was a hugely emotional moment. You have to be there. And you have to be there. And if you weren't there and you didn't experience it, you're not going to be able to understand it. But it was a big moment for me, and it made me think a lot. And yeah, Iran is definitely a revolutionary country. Iran is definitely not a capitalist country. They do not consider themselves to be socialist. They consider themselves to be neither capitalist or socialist. They say their system is not capitalism but Islam. But at the end of the day, they don't accept Marxism. They are very conservative, religious. It's Shia Islam. But at the end of the day, the state, it's not capitalism. They do not consider themselves to be capitalist, and I would agree with them. It's not a capitalist country. Iran is quite an interesting study. And, the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979 at a moment where, the Communist Party of Iran, the Tudeh Party, had a history of reformism. It had a history of not really fighting and kind of, acting kind of like the Soviet lobby and not being revolutionary enough. China and the Maoists had been supporting the Shah and had stabbed the revolution in the back. But Khomeini, he was an anti-imperialist, and he was the only leader in the country that had been consistently anti-imperialist. Right, the British, the communists had collaborated with the British and the British occupation during World War II because, and the Maoists were supporting the Shah because of the three worlds theory and took a bad position. But Khomeini had been consistently anti-imperialist. He was the only force in the country that had a clean record. He had always been against the Western imperialists, and a lot of the population trusted him. Any chance of a conversation with Keith Woods? I don't know who that is. So, and a lot of the population trusted him because of that. The other thing that's important to know about Khomeini was that Khomeini evolved, right? In the 50s, he went into exile because he opposed the Shah from the right. Right? He thought the Shah was too liberal. When the Shah was enacting some progressive reforms with the White Revolution, they called it, he thought the Shah was too liberal. But, in the 70s, if you read Khomeini's writings from the 70s and his speeches, he much more sounds like a Marxist or an anti-imperialist, right? He rejected Marxism, but he sounded almost like he suddenly, he was admiring Che Guevara, for example. He was praising the IRA and the Irish liberation struggle, and that Khomeini's politics shifted a lot in the 70s, mainly because of what was happening in the world and because he was competing with communist groups. Communist groups were very big in Iran. And I, having been there, I will say in the late 70s, a lot of Iranians in college were Maoist. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, Joanne. And even still, Marxism is very influential in Iran. It is not allowed. Can you talk about how Muslims like Imam Hussein, actions like Guevara's Islamic socialism championed by Jamal and al-Nasser? Well, in the 70s, there was a very big Maoist current in Iran. There was also a very big pro-Soviet Marxist-Leninist current. There was something called the People's Fedayeen guerrillas that were waging a guerrilla warfare in the countryside. There was the Tudeh party that was kind of the legal communist party that was kind of the pro-Soviet party. There was the Mujahideen Khalq, which was the Islamo-Marxist, weird Armageddon, crazy death cult that is now aligned with Israel and the United States, but still, it's MEK, Mujahideen Khalq. And that, Maoist stuff was a big influence. And that even now, in the anti-imperialism of the Iranian state, there is a lot of Marxist concepts and Marxist understandings. The economics of imperialism is very, very deeply ingrained in the public. Now, as far as your question about Imam Hussein, well, Imam Hussein is considered to be a martyr. The Battle of Karbala is considered very, very important to Shia Muslims. That's when Hussein was martyred, was killed, and every year thousands of Iranians walk over the border into Iraq to commemorate the Battle of Karbala. When the Imam Hussein was martyred and killed along with his family. It's considered very sacred, and in fact, the holiday, well, I shouldn't call it a holiday because it's like holidays when you celebrate, right? But this sacred day in Shia Islam is, they call it Ashura, And that's the day when, it's very famous, when Muslim men, they whip themselves. Now in Iran they don't do that anymore. It's not legal to do that, I don't think. But in Lebanon, in Pakistan, places like that, Shia Muslims will flog themselves. Well, the reason that they're flogging themselves is because they're flogging themselves for not being there to protect the imam, right? They believe that the Muslims should have come together to protect Imam Hussein, and they were not there. So the Muslim men of the world are whipping themselves for not protecting Imam Hussein. It's pretty wild. Iran is definitely, you talk about a beautiful country, you talk about, a beautiful history, a revolution that has impacted millions of people's lives, an anti-imperialist country, a country that's fighting for its national liberation against the imperialists, a country that has a long record of solidarity. In Iran, they now have diplomatic relations with Britain, but they put the British embassy on Bobby Sands Street. Bobby Sands was the martyr of the Irish national liberation struggle, the hunger striker. So the British embassy is on Bobby Sands Street to make a political statement. And the day the British embassy opened, thousands of young revolutionary Iranians went and rioted in the streets against it. Iran is a very, very complex place. But anyway, if I'm going to get through all these super chats, because I don't have that much time, I think I should really get through these. So, all right. So, how will history remember Xi Jinping? Well, so far they're going to remember him as somebody who adjusted China's system. Crackdown on corruption was big. They're going to remember him as a leader who revived many of the Marxist principles. That's what they're going to remember him as. But we don't really know, right? History is still being written, as Fidel Castro famously said. At the moment, that, I think, is how Xi Jinping is going to be remembered. It's a period where the United States became much more hostile to China than before, and a period in which China's capitalist class, the new capitalist class of China, that was facilitated by China's economic growth, faced a big crackdown. A period in which the Marxist principles of China were reinforced, in which there was a revival in communist teachings in China. That so far seems to be what President Xi Jinping represents. But then again, who knows what happens next, right? History is still being written, right? But I think the main thing is, when Xi Jinping came into power, he required every member of the Chinese Communist Party to watch a documentary about the fall of the Soviet Union and a documentary about the crimes of U.S. imperialism, and to reinforce, the understanding that China is facing attack by the United States and that China will not fall like the Soviet Union did, right? And to re-emphasize the ideology of the Communist Party, to crack down on corruption. President Xi Jinping, I think he's playing a pivotal role. Jiang Zemin's legacy. Well, Jiang Zemin kind of played the opposite role. I think it was Jiang Zemin that actually went as far as saying that China wanted to eventually adopt the Western system. Jiang Zemin was much the opposite of President Xi Jinping, right? Jiang Zemin was he was very much the conciliator. He was very much the person who very much was all about befriending the West. And he took a lot of Deng Xiaoping's market reforms and such. He took them to another level. Jiang Zemin, is kind of the opposite of Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is moving China in the other direction. Jiang Zemin came in after Mao. And he started pushing China to have more of a collective leadership, and he was moving in a more open direction, whereas Xi Jinping is moving more toward, socialist state control, more towards the ideology, understanding the U.S. imperialists and why they're a threat. I think that's the difference. Okay. All right. Is Mike Pompeo an Israeli agent? No. And the thing is, okay, so first of all, this gets glossed over a lot, okay? And a lot of people don't realize this. Netanyahu is not all of Israel. Okay? Right? Kamala Harris, right? Her ties to Israel are very well documented. I did a great interview with Paul LaRudy, a longtime Bay Area Palestine activist. Kamala Harris has worked with Israel for years, since she was just a low-level prosecutor. She has been going to Israel, she's been working with Israel, and she's running against Donald Trump. Right? When Netanyahu came to the U.S. Congress to give a speech against Barack Obama and the Iran deal, the Israeli military told Netanyahu not to do it. They signed a letter. Do you remember this? The Israeli generals signed a letter saying, don't go. Factions in Israel, okay? Trump and Pompeo are in with Netanyahu, and they are in with Likud. But there are other factions in Israel, right? Very many factions in Israel. So it's not that simple. Pompeo is very much an ally of the Likudniks and of Sheldon Adelson and of Netanyahu. That's Mike Pompeo. And he comes out of the CIA, but he comes out of a particular faction in the CIA. Let's remember a faction that is kind of out of step with the rest of the agency. The Bush family. Let's remember the Bush family were always neocons and war hawks and pro-Pentagon and in the CIA, right? Let's remember that, right? Let's remember that most of the CIA, including Obama's CIA director, right, argued that torture was bad public relations. Think about it. If you're the CIA, right, your job is to get people to trust the United States, to try to manipulate things behind the scenes, and the U.S. government is torturing people, that is going to make your job a lot harder now, isn't it? Right? Like the CIA, their whole job is to get people to like the United States, to get people to maneuver, to get people to think the United States is trustworthy. And you start torturing people, that hurts your image, right? There was a specific faction, but you'll remember that that the director of the CIA under Obama made a point of opposing torture, saying he would never torture. Well, he's out, right? And at first, Mike Pompeo was CIA director, and then Gina Haspel, who has a record as defending torture, is now in there, right? And you also remember when Trump spoke to the CIA, how the agency, the folks in the audience were not particularly kind to him either. There are different factions. Thank you, David Fox. There are different factions within Israel, within the CIA, and all of that. Mike Pompeo represents a particular faction. What's interesting is most of that Bush neocon faction, like John Bolton, like George W. Bush, is now supporting Biden. And I suspect that Mike Pompeo really only supports Trump because Trump gave him the job. I think Mike Pompeo is in line with Bush and with Bolton and others, but he's got this gig. He got the job. He's CIA director, so he's going to back Trump, and he's going to try to get the most out of him. Mike Pompeo is responsible for the killing of Qasem Soleimani. Mike Pompeo is responsible for ripping up all these treaties, and Mike Pompeo really, really likes the fact that he has the job as CIA director, and that basically because Trump doesn't want to be overthrown and because Trump wants to remain president, he has to play ball with somebody. And he's made the Pentagon really angry. He's made a lot of the CIA angry by having Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. Trump is basically, that's a compromise that Trump has made in order to stay in office, in order to have the whole state apparatus not against him. Mike Pompeo is very much a compromise that Trump has been forced to accept, I think. I think Trump and Mike Pompeo probably don't like each other. I remember at the UN, during the UN General Assembly, when Trump was giving one of his long talks before the media. Pompeo was sitting there grinning, like laughing, like, who is this idiot? He doesn't respect Trump. He thinks Trump's a fool. He thinks Trump is a buffoon. Mike Pompeo is much smarter than Donald Trump. And Mike Pompeo isn't just representing himself. I mean, he was in the military. He was in the CIA. Mike Pompeo he has a big staff of people. Everything he does is very carefully calculated. And Mike Pompeo, Trump is a front man that Mike Pompeo has to stomach, has to tolerate. That's how it works. Alrighty. I actually don't think I'm going to sing any communist songs for you today. Thanks for the chat. I'm just not in a singing mode. I guess the Iran stuff got me a little bit emotional. So I'm just not in a singing mood. Military coup in the USA. Is it possible? Is it a point of no return? I mean, it wouldn't be the military that would be the first. If Trump were to lose the election and refuse to leave, first it would be the Secret Service that would remove him. If they refused to remove him, then I think that the next would be the U.S. Marshals, and if they refused to remove him, then maybe the military would have to remove him. But I think a lot of things would have to happen. There's a big space between November and January, right? And Trump, I mean, he legally under the Constitution, he is the president until January, until the inauguration. So if there's a hypothetical situation that arises where Trump is refusing to leave, I think that a lot of things have to happen before that. The other thing is that, someone raised Transition Integrity Project. They are planning for, I think the biggest concern isn't going to be what happens at the White House and military coup. I think the main concern would be what happened on the street. Is it possible that states would secede under various scenarios? But the other thing is, folks, we shouldn't rule out the possibility that Trump could just win this thing. Right? I mean, honestly, it could be that Trump just wins. Just wins. Right? That could very easily happen. It could happen that he wins this thing fair and square because people don't like the establishment, because he's playing up that, small towns don't like protesters, liberals are associated with chaos and protests. Trump could just win this thing fair and square, right? And if that happens, that could happen. Now, Biden could win fair and square and Trump refuses to leave. Biden could overwhelmingly win and Trump has no grounds to. I mean, it's this hypothetical situation where Trump loses but refuses to leave, where it's contested, that could happen, but there could be a Biden blowout. There could be a Trump blowout, right? That I think the results have to be very close for something like that to happen. Both sides have to declare victory for that to happen, right? For there to really be a situation where we have crazy, scary situations, it has to be extremely close, and there have to be big institutions on both sides. Let's keep that in mind. If there's a situation where the vote is very close and there's big institutions on both sides, then the scary stuff happens. But short of that, I don't see it. Now, I was asked about pandemics due to livestock. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that the main thing is that our population, we become more urban, right? We're living in more urban areas. The population has increased. Livestock is part of it. I think that, people talk about meat and such, but there are different factors. And many people have speculated things like this pandemic are going to happen more often, right? This is the result of people living close to each other. This is a result of having such easy travel nowadays. People go from country to country to country, from urban center to urban center to urban center, that we as a human species live much closer to each other than we used to, and that this kind of thing may happen more often in the future. So that's just something we have to get used to. All right, folks. So if there's nothing else, I think I am going to cut it off here. I just wanted to hop on and do a live. Like I said, I'm going to try to do a lot more of these than I used to. So I wish you all the best, right? We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. My best wishes to everyone. I'm out.